Hi, this is Alan at North Texas Homesteader, and in this video I want to tell you how I installed a Badlands from Harbor Freight 2500 winch in this 2016 Polaris Ranger. Here you can see the unboxing, and to the right you can see the contents of the Harbor Freight ZXR2500 Badland winch. You can see the winch. It came with a Fairlane roller and a contactor box. It's a little black box there with the wire sticking out. That also has a 50 amp fuse in line with it. And then there's a handheld controller, and then it also came with a wireless controller. After purchasing the winch, I did some research and ended up buying a bracket to help the installation, to make it easier to install from KFI. I'll leave the information about the KFI bracket down below in the description section. I also ended up having to purchase a new Fairlane roller, and I'll describe that in a second. Here you can see the stock Fairlane roller bolt pattern doesn't fit the bracket. It's too small, and so it's a non-standard size. So I ended up having to purchase this Champion Fairlane roller, and its bolt pattern does fit, and so I had to use that for the installation. Okay, first, to get started, let's take off the hood. And that's simple. Just lift it off. Second, we want to take off this front bumper. Taking off this bumper, there are 4 screws, 2 on the bottom, which I'm taking off right there. And then also there are 2 on the top. Once you get those out, you should be able to just pull the bumper straight out. Here's where I'm assembling the winch onto the bracket, the KFI bracket. It's important to note here that the winch is installed kind of upside down from what they show on the box, and the reason for that is it lines up better with the fair lead. Here I'm installing the bracket back onto the frame of the Ranger. Hey everybody, I'm back. I just wanted to give you an update. This is after pretty much everything's been put back on. Finally got everything installed. And if you remember, I had talked about this case and all the wiring that has gone on. This had the circuit breaker in it, and how the wiring didn't fit. So I ended up going a little bit far and beyond. Like I say, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And the contactor that they provided, and this is the contactor that they provided. There's no part numbers or anything on it, but I went out and purchased a third-party one. One that fit the bolt pattern so that it could be mounted directly in here. And the case that they had, if you remember the original picture, it had everything just jammed in here. All the wiring and everything was in here. And then this had that circuit breaker for the battery, and this was all connected into one cable. Well, when I went to try to lay everything out, of course it didn't fit. The wiring was not long enough to go down to the winch, and the wiring also didn't fit up here very well. The box, I didn't like how everything was just shoved in there. So I printed out, I have a 3D printer, and I did a 3D model, and I laid out a new box so that everything is compartmentalized and separated. And then all the wiring comes out a lot neater. I put a disconnect here to disconnect it from the battery connections. The battery connections over here is from a kit that I purchased from Polaris that brought battery terminals up to here just for the winch, but I did that a couple of years ago and just now getting around to putting the winch in. This has the connection for the remote operation switch. And then this also comes with a remote control. I did connect it up to the ignition accessory so that you can't operate it unless the ignition is on the accessories. Connect the remote in. We'll see that the out works and the in works. And then to use the remote, you have to hold the on button until the blue light comes on. And then you can use it to pull out and also pull in. So everything's wired up and works. I really like the 3D box that I printed for it. That works really well. Some notes about the installation. The bolts for this and on the inside over here were too short because it goes through this piece, the bracket for this. It goes through this extra plate that you have here to match up the bolts. And then on the back of the bumper, there's also a piece there. So the bolts that came with it were way too short. So I had to go buy some longer bolts for that. And I routed the cable through here, for cable down to the winch, down over this, and then up through this place just behind this plastic piece, and then back up over into here to get it back up to the contactor. So I intend to store this and a remote inside the Ranger and then use it as needed whenever I need to use the winch. Here is the final wiring that I used to connect the winch. On the left-hand side is the battery connections with a quick disconnect connector. And inside my 3D printed enclosure is the 50 amp fuse that comes off of the positive of the battery. It goes into the contactor on the B+ or the battery power in high. And the remote control receiver has 4 wires coming out of it, one being the battery, and then also a negative for the battery, so it has voltage. And then there's an in-out, which is an in, which is the yellow, and an out, actually a white wire. I showed it here with gray so you could see it. And then the handheld connector, 3 wires coming out of it, a red, blue, and black. Those are low current lines. You just have the 50 amp fuse for the high current line. And so coming off the remote or the handheld, you have 12 volts going in. And then when you use the remote, wireless remote, press the in, it'll basically put 12 volts out on the yellow line. And then if you have the out button pressed, It'll put 12 volts out on the white wire. And then for the handheld, when you press the end button, basically it'll put 12 volts on the blue wire, and then if you press the out button, it'll put 12 volts on the black wire. And I connected those wires together, the two ends, the yellow and the blue, and then connected it up to the green wire that comes out of the contactor. And then I connected the black wire from the handheld connector to the white wire of the remote, and that connects up to the black wire on the contactor. And then for the winch, basically you have the plus and the minus, and when voltage is applied one way, it goes in, and when it's applied the other way, it goes out. Okay, we're here to wrap up this video on the installation of this winch on this Polaris Ranger. And a couple things that I wanted to talk about before we actually quit is the 3D models that I created. I'm going to show those up here. And the 3D model for the top has 3 compartments in it, and those compartments are for the handheld winch controller with the cable, the connector for that. The next compartment is the receiver, the wireless receiver module. And on the bottom, you can see a couple of small like steps that I put in there to hold the module up from bouncing around inside of the little cavity that I created for it, so that it's a nice tight fit. Also leaves room for the wires to come underneath it from both the circuit breaker and the wires that are coming off the bottom of the receiver. And then the last compartment that has the big step up, that holds the 50 amp circuit breaker in place so that it doesn't bounce around. And then the wires run underneath that and underneath the RX module, and then out from underneath the whole 3D printed module. I want to talk about the cost. I bought this winch on sale for $69.99, $70. It was normally $89.99, and as of today, I saw it listed for its list price as $99.99. The mounting bracket was $60.45, and the Fairlead replacement that I purchased was $13.65. And the replacement contactor, winch contactor, it was $27.99. And then the battery quick disconnect that I installed was $8.99. So the grand total was $181.07. I did purchase some extra connectors, you know, some inline connectors, but I was going to buy those anyway, so I don't really count those as costs. And when you break it down, they're only pennies a piece. So at the most, let's add another $1 in there. So far, or a little less than $1, so that would be $182 for this install. Now the installation was fairly simple. The mounting bracket from KFI really made it an easy install, and I would do that again. That was definitely worth the price. And pricing out other winches from Polaris and from KFI and other places, they're kind of high dollar. They're $300–400 and even more for the same size winch, same power. They may have longer run times on them, you know, for the duty cycle, but I'm not intending on this being a use all the time type deal. It's going to be just every once in a while. And for the price savings, at least half, at least of those type of winches, I think this is well worth it. Time will tell how this works out long term as I use it on the property for whatever job I need it to do. So in conclusion, I would buy this again, and I would buy the KFI and the replacement contactor and all these pieces. Well, thanks for joining me on this video, and I'll see you next time.